One of the documents actually said, please do not destroy these files until the subject cools off. I was brought to the CIA, I signed my life away, I was given a briefing, I was told this is for real, and I was actually at Area 51 and I actually sat inside one of the crafts. Jeez. And I just want you to know this. Einstein had actually gone to the president during that 1 week, the shoot-down order, and said, Mr. President, anybody who can come across millions of miles of space will know how to take care of themselves once they get here. Please don't start something you can't.
He was right.
You can't finish. The thing appeared from the left to the right. It was down low, it was in front of the car, it was not a light in the sky, it was an object, and it was pulsing, and it was moving up and down.
Clearly not a plane.
Yeah, moving very, very slowly, and my life just changed.
Welcome to another edition of Beyond Belief with our guest, Grant Cameron. He's been researching UFOs since 1975. He has studied all of the U.S. president's roles, the roles of consciousness, and the relationship between UFOs and other paranormal phenomena. He has written 6 books, has 5 more near completion. You never stop, Grant.
I try to stay busy.
What got you interested in the field of ufology, Grant?
Well, now we're going to this contact modality thing. I was interested in Edgar Cayce, very young. Mm-hmm. When I was at university, I did a study on dying people in hospitals. So I had all these bizarre questions about, does anybody ever have someone come to visit them before they die to lead them over to the other side? Does anybody ever predict their death? Are there near-death experiences? This is in the 70s, so this is when near-death experiences first started coming out. And I went to the hospitals and I talked not to the doctors or the nurses, I talked to the chaplains. And the chaplains are there when the people die, and I would ask them these questions. Does everybody ever predict their death? And they'd say, oh yeah. And they would tell you these stories. And I went, wow, all these stories are true. So I had done that study. I had no interest in UFOs, and basically what happened is there was a small town called Carmen, Manitoba, just north of the American border, that was having these objects. They were claiming they were seeing this thing every night. And so I just said to my friend, well, let's go see what they're looking at. I had no interest in UFOs. I'd never thought about extraterrestrial life that I can think of. And we went out, we were there for an hour, and nothing really happened. And my friend said, well, drive back into the town one more time. If nothing happens, let's go home. I said, fantastic, this has been a total waste of time. And as we drove back in, we turned the car to go back in, the thing appeared from the left to the right. It was down low, it was in front of the car, it was not a light in the sky, it was an object, and it was pulsing, and it was moving up and down.
Clearly not a plane.
Yeah, moving very, very slowly, and my life just changed. I went, it's real. Like, it was sort of my first paranormal experience, so it's fine to hear somebody has a paranormal experience, but when it happens to you, it just sort of sets you off.
Did you have that feeling inside of you, like, oh my God?
Oh yeah, I was just floored. And then I went out 2 nights later. My friends, they weren't all that interested, but I said, come on, let's go again. And the second night it came right at us, and it was almost like, it was almost planned. It came right at us, and I was looking, and then I remember as it turned and started flying into the northeast, I looked at it, and then I was thinking, what are they doing? Because they were just sort of flying along, and it didn't make any sense. Yeah. And I became obsessed, and I published a book. I went and interviewed all these people in the town, and nobody wanted anything to do with it. The one woman said, you may believe in this kind of stuff, count me among the unbelievers, one of the publishers.
Really?
And I went, wow, I couldn't believe, because to me it was so dramatic. And it was at that point that I said, well, I really don't know what's going on, but somebody in this world has got to know what's going on here. And that's where I started this pursuit, to find the highest level people I could find. So I chased the President of the United States, the Canadian government, I chased the highest intelligence people, and I wouldn't really interact with them, but I'd listen very carefully to what these people were saying, and that's how I got into documents. So I started looking.
Because you're known for the documents now.
Yeah, and I started the document thing with the Canadian government, because most people don't know, and that's one of the 5 books I got coming up. And I've had this stuff sort of on my website and stuff for years, and then I said, I better put in a book. My father worked for the Department of Transport in Canada.
Okay.
And the official flying saucer investigation was done by the Department of Transport. So this synchronicity happens. Somebody in my father's office comes and he's got a sighting. He tells me about this and he says, if you really want to know what's going on with UFOs, you should study what the Canadian government was studying in the 1950s. And I said,
bingo.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then he said, he was the most brilliant engineer. His name was _Smith, most brilliant engineer I ever met. But the guy was totally crazy. He was talking to aliens. They were landing, and I'm going, what? And it's like, so I was still very young, and I actually got a plane ticket, and I flew to Ottawa to talk to Wilbur Smith's wife. And it was at that point she started to confirm this. Yeah, we opened a landing base for UFOs to land, and she was telling me all this stuff. And the Prime Minister was involved, and I'm going like, wow. I was just sort of floored. So I went after his files. Those are the first files I got, was Wilbur Smith's files. And the late Stanton Friedman was actually the guy that forced them out in 1978.
Okay.
So that's when it starts.
He was Canadian too.
Yeah, and they'd forced these documents out. The Canadians released all their documents. And when I saw the documents, that's when we discovered the famous top secret memo, which I think is one of the most significant documents ever. And this is the one where Wilbur Smith is negotiating with the Americans on FM frequencies, because he was the head radio engineer for the Canadian government. He's negotiating, and he's interested in UFOs, and so he says to the Americans, like, so what's going on? And he's basically read in. He's given stuff, and material starts coming to Canada, and he writes this memo in November of 1950 in which he says, I made discreet inquiries to the Canadian Embassy in Washington, and what I was told was, number one, flying saucers exist. It's the most highly classified subject in the United States. It's of tremendous significance to the Americans, and there's a small group headed by Dr. Vannevar Bush who are trying to figure out the modus operandi.
Wow.
And we're also told by American officials, and this is 1950, we're also told by American officials that other things might be associated with the flying saucers, such as mental phenomena. And the Americans aren't doing very well because they've said if we're working on this problem, they're willing to exchange credentials and talk to us about this. So I gathered all that material. And then in the early 1980s, Wilbur Smith, when he was about to die, he realized his files they were going to try to recover his files. So he told his wife, he said, they're going to come and try to get my files, his private files. He said, when they come, I don't care who it is, you do not give them the files. She said the Americans came, the Russians came, and the Canadians came, and they all asked for the files for research purposes. She said she had destroyed the files. Actually, they had moved them to the oldest son's house.
And hid them.
And in the 1980s, then those files came out. And then we discovered documents like what we call the embassy documents. And this is the actual correspondence through the Canadian Embassy in Washington, where Wilbur's talking to the second secretary at the Canadian Embassy. And the Canadian Embassy is waiting for the Americans to make a statement because they realize there's been a crash. They realize something's happened, and they're waiting for the Americans to make a statement. And the Smith files were called Project Magnet. That was the official project. Magnet. And one of the documents actually said, please do not destroy these files until the subject cools off. So you actually had this document where they were going to destroy the files, and I guess it slipped through the cracks. So this top secret memo leaked out. And so I went from there to trying to find out who in the United States had given Wilbur Smith these documents, or briefed him, trying to figure out who the American side was. And that's when I came across this former president of Penn State University, 14 honorary doctorate degrees, friends of President Eisenhower, the co-developer of the homing torpedo, very high-level guy who basically confirms, yeah, MJ-12's for real, you're up against the windmills, leave it alone. I started going after his files, and I went to Penn State University. I spent a couple weeks there looking through hundreds of thousands of pages of files.
They gave you access?
Yeah, and I'm looking for it because we knew he had a file on us. He was dealing with various researchers, sending them little quips and stuff like that. We were looking for this file. I never did find the file, but he said that his files from 1950, and this is when Wilbur Smith was dealing with the Canadians, had gone to the Truman Library. And that's when I went to the Truman Library and I said to them, what do you got on UFOs? And that's when they said, well, we really don't have that much. We have all when in 1952, there was the overflight of Washington, D.C., and they were going to shoot down.
UFOs all over the place.
And the first week, there was this shoot-down order, and it was across all the newspapers in the United States. And so all these telegrams started coming into the White House to say, please don't shoot them down. And there was even a story told by Frank Edwards, who was the big broadcaster in the 1950s, and he had stated that Einstein had actually gone to the president during that 1 week, the shoot-down order, and said, Mr. President, anybody who can come across millions of miles of space will know how to take care of themselves once they get here. Please don't start something you can't.
He was right.
You can't
right.
finish. And so when I got there, they gave me all these telegrams, and then I'm thinking, this is kind of strange. I mean, you'd figure this is the most important subject in the world. The president's got to know what's going on, and there was really nothing there. And just down the road, maybe a couple hours down the road in Kansas, was the Abilene, Kansas. Kansas was where the Eisenhower files were. So I went to the Eisenhower Library, and it was there where it's very formal. They all the archives have ties and stuff, and I went there, and you have to do an interview to research. So I said, well, I'm looking for UFO stuff, and they pulled 5 documents. One was the famous Robertson Panel CIA report was in there, and 4 other telegrams, just minor stuff. And I said, well, how many pages have you got here? And he said 28 million. I'm thinking, you got 5 documents on UFOs?
28 million total pages.
Pages in the archives. And that's when I suddenly decided, I'm going to go to all the presidential libraries, because the president's got to know. So I made this pursuit. So then I got the Roosevelt files, everything that was in the Roosevelt library, everything that was in the Truman library.
Oh, you went wild.
Yeah, I went to everybody. I got them all. And then I sort of hit pay dirt with the Clintons. And so I was filing with the Clintons before they left office. There's one agency that has to answer FOIs. That's the science advisor to the president.
Well, if there's an obvious cover-up going on, Grant, let's take a look.
Yeah.
When we start getting into the upper, highest level echelon of the cover-up of the UFO phenomenon, I still feel that I need to be careful and researchers need to be careful. Who's the actual person at the top of it? Is it David Rockefeller? Is it some member of the Rothschild family? Is it some member that we don't know about within the deep black budget community? Or is it the aliens themselves in one form or another? I guess we can ask ourselves, what is the likelihood that the non-human intelligences that are behind the UFO phenomenon are managing the cover-up to some extent? I think we could say a few things. One, we can say they do not have an interest in being out there, in being publicly acknowledged. They do operate by stealth. I think they've always operated by stealth. So they have an interest in maintaining a cover of secrecy. Toward that end, if I were tasked with doing counterintelligence on the cover-up, I would have to consider the likelihood that they themselves have some role to play in the secrecy.
That was Richard Dolan on the Gaia series Deep Space. Something's going on.
Yeah, I believe that both the government and the intelligence are playing the same game. I say there's not a direct cover-up, because if there was a direct cover-up, they do what the Canadians do. Because I'm a Canadian, I get asked all the time, so what's the Canadian government doing? And I'm going, I haven't got the foggiest notion what the Canadian government does. I have no idea, because the Canadians don't talk about it. So if you're going to cover it up, you stop talking about it. You don't leak documents, you don't have people talking about this kind of stuff, you just be quiet. And if you want to disclose, then you stand the president or the CIA director up and you tell people what's going on. So they're not covering up and they're not disclosing. The same thing with the intelligence. If they say in the abduction scenario, if they want to cloak themselves, nobody sees them. So they're not covering up. They could not be seen, but they're allowing themselves to be seen. But they're doing the same thing, not covering up and not disclosing, but they're giving little hints, like people are getting ideas in their heads, these experiencers, they're giving messages and stuff. So I think both sides are doing the same thing. They're doing this gradual disclosure, which goes back to this study that was done in the 1960s. It said, if we are facing this phenomenon, we have to gradually release it to the people. You can't just drop it on the people in one day. So I think both are doing the same sort of thing, where it's almost like the breadcrumb thing, where they're leading us slowly through this process of acclimatization.
On purpose or
Yes.
by necessity?
Well, I think in everything in government, they will have all sorts of scenarios. And to give you the idea, a couple of years back, Paul Hellyer told this story. He was asked,
Canadian defense minister.
who my father actually flew him around because he was in the same department. He ran the department.
Was he under Trudeau?
Yes, he was under Trudeau. He was asked, well, who in the Canadian government is in charge? And he said, well, maybe the Privy Council. And he's sort of guessing. He doesn't really know, because he really didn't know. He told me clearly he didn't know when he was defense minister. He wasn't interested.
He should have known.
Yeah, but he didn't. Stuff was coming across his desk. We didn't pay attention. And then when the second round of questions comes, he says, I know somebody who does know. He says, I was contacted by an Air Force guy, and he said, there's a guy here, he ran the emergency measures for Canada. So if there's a nuclear attack, or if there's a war or whatever, you have the emergency, like here it's FEMA.
Right.
So you have this agency that has to put money in the banks, and they have to do all these, and they would have all these scenarios. What do we do if this happens? And not that anything's gonna happen. So he was told that this guy was dying, and he had something that he had to get off his chest, and he had decided Paul Hellyer was the guy he wanted to tell. He was dying of ALS. And so Paul didn't do anything, and the guy phoned him back, and he said, he's about to go off the cliff, you better talk to him. So Paul said he phones up this guy, head of emergency management from Canada, and the guy says, I just want you to let you know, it's all for real. I was brought to the CIA, I signed my life away, I was given a briefing, I was told this is for real, and I was actually at Area 51, and I actually sat inside one of the crafts. Jeez. And I just want you to know this. And that would make sense. That, see, I see
That's
government as doing their
amazing,
job, that people in government, because I was in government myself, that you just do your job. You don't know what the next guy's doing, but you know what you're supposed to do.
Right?
And they have their things. So in these scenarios of emergency management or FEMA or whatever, there's going to be all sorts of people making policies and trying to figure out this sort of stuff. I don't think it's haphazard. I think they spend a lot of money on this, and that goes back to the documents from the 1980s, which have now sort of been confirmed in this latest leak, was that MJ-12 is for real, that there is a group called MJ-12, and a group that was put in charge of this thing to control a thing. And that would make sense in a government where everybody's doing their job, everybody's trying to do it constitutionally, everybody's trying to solve the problems. You would organize this stuff. I don't really believe so much in rogue government. I believe a lot of it is constitutional. It's just that people don't know because you're so limited in what you know. And that was my experience in government working at a university, is that I had the keys to the president's office, 8 vice president's office, human resources. I had keys to everything. I didn't know what was going on. Yeah. I only knew my little job.
Of all the documents you have uncovered based on ufology, what are some of the most significant ones?
Okay, the top secret memo would be the top one, the Canadian one, that basically says flying saucers are real. And that was a top secret document that the Canadian government does not deny. It's in the archives. There was that one. There was a couple of surprises when I was at the Reagan Library. I was looking to see, why did Reagan put all this stuff in his speeches? Because I knew that like everything else in government, everything is done, to the max. There's like a State of the Union address will have 30 different drafts. It'll have 25 different agencies that have to sign off on every little word that is said. And so I was trying to figure out, why did Reagan put all this UFO stuff in his speeches? He was always talking about it. And so I was looking, and it's 5 minutes before the archives closed. I said to her, "Is this Ronald Reagan's handwriting?" She says, "No." She flips through these pages, and she points. She says, "That's his writing there."
That's it.
And it was Ronald Reagan. What had happened when he made the famous speech at the United Nations talking about the alien invasion,
what would happen if
the world would unite, it was him talking about it in his handwriting. And what had happened is he put it in the speech, and they pulled it out. The speechwriter pulled it out, and he said, about my fantasy, could you please put it, how we would be united if creatures from another planet, could you please put it back in the speech?" I was just floored. Here it was, this document. And then I guess the Rockefeller Initiative documents. Bruce Maccabee had filed for them, and I heard he got 500 pages. And I went, so I filed. And I got
500 pages?
And I got 1,000. When I filed, I got
all
1,000.
UFOs?
All UFOs. And this was this exchange that Rockefeller had said, whether Perot wins or whether Bush wins or whether Clinton wins, I'm going in there and I'm going to get the president to disclose. And I remember Bud Hopkins telling me, he said to him, "Lawrence, I don't think that's how it works." "I'm going to do it," he said. "I'm doing it. I'm going in there and the president's going to disclose." And so he went in, and because he was a very powerful guy, the White House had to deal with him. So they didn't allow him to get to the president, because there's always this plausible deniability. The president doesn't know. And so
and some of them don't.
Yeah, they may not, because they're not interested in it. They have
I would say Nixon knew.
Yeah.
Reagan knew. Clinton probably knew. I'm not sure Carter knew. What do you think? Or Gerald Ford?
Well, we looked at the Holloman Air Force Base film, and we determined that 3 of them had actually seen this film of this landing at Holloman Air Force Base, and that was Ford, Bush Sr., and there's a rumor that Jimmy Carter had been shown this film as well. That's kind of up. I still think it's constitutional that people are going to, if the president wants to know, there's nothing they can do to stop him. The president wants documents, and if he's interested, he can get the documents. But what happened with Rockefeller is he went in, so they kept him away from the president. This is very interesting because it involves Hillary Clinton. So he went in there, and he was dealing with the science advisor. And the science advisor actually asked for a UFO briefing, and it goes to the CIA, to a guy named Dr. Ronald Pandolfi. And Pandolfi, the CIA is not involved, so he gives it to Bruce Maccabee to do the briefing. Now it's no longer a briefing, it's just a citizen's opinion of what's going on. And so this 1,000 pages is Rockefeller, back and forth with Rockefeller and the science advisor. And they're trying to, and every time they would try to stonewall him, he'd say, "Okay, I think it's time to send a letter to the president." And so in this 1,000 pages of documents, you have this letter that he's always threatening to send to the president. And one of the 2 most significant documents in the Rockefeller Initiative were 2 Hillary Clinton documents that nobody noticed. And one was that he would give it to, say, the science advisor. He'd say, "I'm sending this letter to the president demanding UFO disclosure," and people would help him edit. Hillary Clinton was one of the people who helped him edit the letter on UFO disclosure.
And this was when she was the first lady?
For the first lady. Yeah. And that was the one document. The other document that was very significant in this exchange was that all the material going from Rockefeller to the science advisor and from the science advisor back to Rockefeller was going to the first lady's office. And I couldn't figure out, why would it be going through Hillary's office? And then it suddenly occurred to me, it was this plausible deniability of the president. So the president doesn't know, Bill Clinton, I don't know what's going on, whatever. So the stuff goes, it goes to Hillary, and at night Hillary goes to Bill and says, okay, this is what's happening, Rockefeller says this, and it goes, and you have this plausible deniability. It's coming through Hillary, so that's why all the material is going through Hillary Clinton's office. She was deeply involved in this initiative.
If you like this video and you want to see more amazing content, go ahead and check out the next video on our channel.